Hey everybody, how are you doing? Hope you're doing good. Today we are going to be making cinnamon rolls. So here we go. First, our cinnamon rolls are a yeast bread, and so we need to activate our yeast. So in this measuring cup, I have 1 cup of milk, and to this I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of water. So I added my 1/4 cup of water to my 1 cup of milk, and now I'm going to heat this in the microwave. And I want it to be the temperature that makes yeast the happiest. And that temperature is 110 to 115 degrees. Okay, so my yeast is exactly 111 degrees, which is perfect. So to this, I'm going to add my yeast. And it calls for 1 sachet of yeast, which is equal to 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. So I'm just going to pour that into my milk mixture. Now, what does yeast need to be happy? It needs food. In this case, it's going to be eating the milk sugars, the lactose. It needs warm liquid, right? 110 to 115 degrees, and it needs time. Okay, so we're just going to set this aside and give it some time. Okay, now in another bowl, I have 4 cups of flour, and this time I'm using bread flour. So, what is the difference between bread flour and all-purpose flour? The difference is the amount of protein or gluten, okay? So bread flour has a higher protein content than all-purpose flour. And we want our breads usually to have more gluten in them because it gives it that chew and that structure. So I'm going to be using bread flour. If you don't have bread flour at home, this makes perfect cinnamon rolls with all-purpose flour as well. So I have 4 cups of bread flour here. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of just plain sugar, and I'm going to use a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And then I have a secret ingredient that goes into these, and it is instant Jell-O pudding, vanilla flavored. Okay, so this is a 3.4 ounce pack, and I'm only going to use half of this. So you can eyeball it, and if it's not completely accurate, it's okay, but I'm going to use my digital scale. So I put my whole bowl onto my scale, and I turn it on and tear it out to 0. So if this whole thing is 3.4 ounces, and I want half of that, how much am I looking for? Okay, I want this to weigh, so let's take 3 ounces. Say it was just 3 ounces. Half of 3 ounces is 1.5 ounces. And then half of 0.4 ounces is 0.2 ounces. So about 1.5, a little bit more than 1.5 ounces. Depends on how your scale works. Mine isn't super accurate. So, I mean, it doesn't go to too small of a measurement. So 1.5. We'll do 1 3/4. How about that? That's pretty good. Okay, and I'm just gonna whisk this mixture together. Till it's nice and combined. So, typically when I make these, I will use my stand mixer. But I know a lot of people don't always have stand mixers, so I'm going to do it by hand for you. So, in my mixing bowl, I am going to add 1 egg at room temperature. And I need 1/4 of a cup of melted butter. Now I always use unsalted butter in my baked goods. If you only have salted at home, you can just maybe reduce the amount of salt that you put in your dough. So I'm going to go ahead and melt this. I don't want it boiling hot. I want it just melted. Okay, so my doing is when I add it to my egg, if it's too hot, it's going to do what to my egg? It would cook my egg, right? And so it's just warmed and melted through. I'm just going to whisk my butter and my egg together in this bowl. Make sure I get all that butter out. Okay. Now I'm done with my whisk. I want to get rid of my whisk because the dough is going to be thick and I don't want to be trying to mix a dough with my whisk because then I'm going to get a bunch of dough stuck in between my whisk. Okay, so now I'm going to my egg and butter mixture. I'm just going to add my flour mixture. Give it a little stir, followed by my yeast mixture, my yeast and milk mixture. And then I'm just going to stir it until it forms a dough. Okay, at this point it's getting kind of hard to stir. So I'm going to go ahead and dump it out onto my counter. And I'm going to start kneading this by hand. Now remember, it's going to start off sticky, but then it'll start coming together, and it shouldn't be we may have to add some flour to the counter. I'm going to try to get away without adding flour at this point. And why are we kneading? What is the point of kneading? It's to develop that gluten, right? We want those strands of gluten to form that amazing network. And then what does that network of gluten do? It holds in all of those air bubbles, all of that carbon dioxide, right, that the yeast is going to be releasing. Let me get my bench scraper. So I'm going to be kneading this. See how it's becoming less and less sticky as we go, right? I'm going to be kneading this for about 8 to 10 minutes. I knew that this dough would eventually come together and be less sticky once we got that gluten going, but also because the tendency for people is to add too much flour. And when you add too much flour, it's going to change the entire feel and structure of your dough, because when you add more flour, the hydration of your dough is getting less and less, right? And you'll end up with a dense cinnamon roll rather than a nice, light, fluffy, chewy cinnamon roll. You can talk. I'm going to edit this part out.
It's on?
Yeah, I'm filming myself. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, so I have been kneading this for close to 8 minutes. So, how do I know when I am done kneading? What is one method I can use to check? Okay, I'm going to do the window pane method. So you take a bit of your dough and you gently stretch it out and see. Usually, if I could hold it up to a window, I'd be able to see through it without it ripping so that it is see-through. And I have definitely gotten that. I don't know if you guys can see through that, but I can. Okay, so we are done. So I'm gonna roll this into a ball. And I need to put it into a bowl. So what do I do with my bowl before I put my dough ball into it? You gotta grease it first, okay? That way, when the dough is rising, it doesn't get stuck to the sides of the bowl. And it doesn't inhibit it from its full potential. We're oiling it, so I added a little oil, and I'm just gonna spread that around with a paper towel. Then I'm going to take my beautiful ball of dough and kind of roll that around in the oil. And then I'm going to cover it with a tea towel. And I am going to just let this rest in a warm part of my kitchen until it doubles in size. And that's going to take about an hour. So I'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so it has been 1 hour, and actually it's been a little over an hour because I had to go to the grocery store, but it has definitely more than doubled in size. You can put your finger in it, and if it holds its shape and doesn't deflate, and the finger doesn't spring back, then you know that it has risen enough. Mine is starting to deflate a little bit around where I stick my finger in, and that is simply because I gave it a little too much time. It's been about an hour and a half instead of an hour, but it's okay because we're going to punch it down anyways to spread it out. But before we do that, I want to get my pans ready. So I'm using 2 cake pans. You can use rectangle pans, square pans, whatever pans you got, but I'm going to do 2 circle pans because I'm going to actually freeze one of them for later, so I can keep it in the freezer and pull it out at a later date. And one of them, the other one, I'm going to actually stick in the refrigerator and let the last rise be a slow rise in the fridge, and then I'm going to bake them in the morning. Now, if you want to make them all at once, making them, letting them rise, making the dough, let it rise, shape them, let it rise, and then bake them off all on the same day, you can do that too. But I want them ready for breakfast. Okay, so my pans are buttered and all ready to go. I'm going to make the filling before I spread out my my dough. So I have had this stick of butter, which is a ½ cup. I've had this sitting out at room temperature, so it is soft, okay? Easily mixed in. Then I need 1 cup of brown sugar. And remember, brown sugar, how do I measure it? Do I lightly scoop it in? No, I'm firmly packing brown sugar, okay? 1 cup of brown sugar. Then I'm going to use 4 teaspoons of cinnamon, okay? One, 2, 3, 4. So I measured that all in teaspoons, but how else could I have measured that? I could have done 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon, because there's 3 teaspoons in a tablespoon. Okay, so sometimes I like to just spread the butter out on my dough once I have it shaped into a rectangle, and then sprinkle the sugar on top. But this time, I'm just going to mix it all together so it forms kind of a gooey paste. Okay, now I am going to put my dough out onto my clean surface, and I am just going to gently punch out the air bubbles. Pull this down so you can see it better. And I'm going to start trying to shape this into a rectangle. Technically, you could use a rolling pin, but this dough is so soft and so easy to maneuver that I can just do it with my hands. So you're kind of looking for something around 15 inches by 9 inches, but it doesn't have to be perfect. The main thing is you want the corners to be a nice kind of edge, okay? Now I'm going to take my good filling and I'm going to kind of evenly distribute it all over, and then I'm going to spread it out all over the top of my dough. So, you can use your spatula, you can use a cake spatula, but I'm just going to use my rubber spatula and spread it out as evenly as possible, making sure to get all the way to the edge. Now, at this point, if you wanted to sprinkle some raisins or some pecans on top, those are really good too, but I'm just going to leave mine plain because I've got 2 picky eaters at home. Okay, so I've spread out the filling all over nice at the top, starting with the wide end, and I'm going to gently roll it together, kind of trying to keep it nice and tight. Right at the end, give it kind of a nice little roll to kind of seal the edge. Okay, and then using my serrated knife, some people like to use floss to cut these, but I'm just going to gently use my serrated knife, and I am going to make 12 rolls out of this. So I'm going to put 6 in one pan and 6 in the other. So in order to do that, the easiest way for me is to slice it down the center, and then slice each of these logs down the center, and then make each of those into 3 cinnamon rolls. They don't have to be exact, but the closer in size they are, the more evenly they will bake. Okay, then in the pan they go. I want them pretty side up. Put them as evenly around the pan as possible because these are going to grow. They are going to rise again because the yeast in those rolls is going to do one more rise. So I am going to, since I'm not baking any of them off right away, I'm going to cover them both in saran wrap really well. And one of them I'm going to stick in the freezer, and the other one I'm just going to stick in the fridge. Now, if I did want to bake these off right away, then I would let them rise for about another 30 minutes, and then stick them straight into the oven. And the oven should be at 350 degrees. But since I'm not going to do this right away, I'm just going to cover them. One of them is going to be frozen, the other one's going to slow rise in the refrigerator overnight. And then come morning, I'm going to pull it out of the fridge, probably about an hour before I want to stick them in the oven to let them come to room temperature and give that yeast a little chance to wake up. And then you're going to notice them growing a little bit, and then once you put them in the oven, they're going to have that last oven spring, and they're going to get even bigger and more delicious. So while they're baking is when we're going to make our frosting.
Okay, so here are our cinnamon rolls. It is the next morning. I pulled these out of the refrigerator about an hour ago. I probably could have taken them out a little bit sooner because it is really cold in my house. And preferably I'd like it to be around 70 degrees in the house for these guys to come up to room temperature and start rising again, wake up that yeast again. But they're gonna be just fine. Now, if you notice, you'll see a little puddle of, it looks like syrup at the bottom of the pan, and that is perfectly fine. That's just because sugar attracts water molecules, and so that is just kind of a syrupy sauce from all the sugar that is inside our cinnamon rolls, but it's going to bake up just fine. Now, I've been preheating the oven. It is at 350 degrees, and you can notice that I'm putting my rolls on another pan. It's just to give it a little bit of insulation because sugar does tend to burn quickly, and I don't want the bottoms of my cinnamon rolls to burn quicker than the actual insides are cooked. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick these in the middle rack of my oven and close it up. And those are gonna be in there for about 30 minutes or so, but I'm gonna keep my eye on them. Okay, so while our lovely rolls are in the oven, we're gonna go ahead and prep the cream cheese frosting. You can also just make just a plain icing sugar drizzle on them if that's what you prefer, but these are kind of more like the cinnamon from the mall cinnamon rolls. So I have, on my plate, I have 4 ounces of cream cheese and 4 tablespoons of butter, or a 1/4 cup of butter. And mine again is unsalted butter, so I'm going to be adding just a pinch of salt to my frosting. I have warmed them in the microwave. As you can tell, they're not melted, they're just kind of room temperature, nice and soft and pliable, because I'm going to be doing this by hand. You can always use a blender mixer or your KitchenAid, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is something you can do if you don't have any fancy equipment. So I'm just going to kind of mush this stuff together. Butter is still a little bit cold. I could have heated that up a little bit more, but the friction from the stirring will melt it more. Okay, then I need 1 cup of powdered sugar. This is also considered confectioner's sugar, powdered sugar, same thing. It's just sugar ground really finely, and then they typically add cornstarch to it. People also call it icing sugar. So we need 1 cup of this, just like other sugar, or just like flour. You're going to be measuring this like you do flour. You don't want to pack it. You just want to lightly get it into the cup and level it off. Okay, so we're not packing our powdered sugar. That looks just about right. I need 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. You can also flavor this with other extracts too if you want. But I'm just going to do plain old vanilla. And then I'm going to need 1.5 tablespoons of milk. But before that, I'm going to try to gently mix in this powdered sugar. I'm going to say gently because if you mix it too quickly, it's going to go all over because it's very light and airy and fluffy. Now, I am making the entire batch of frosting, even though I'm only baking off half of them, right? Because my other half are in the freezer for a later date, because they're much better eaten fresh out of the oven. So, but what I'm going to do is I can keep this frosting in the fridge for quite some time, probably about a week. It would be okay in the fridge. Or what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to freeze it and see how well it goes in the freezer. Now, you could have made this frosting the night before and just stuck it in the fridge. That way all of your mixing and mess making is done in one night, and then just pop those suckers out of the fridge in the morning and bake them off, and you've already got the frosting done, and then we'll just top it with the frosting once they come out of the oven, and you're good to go. So this would be a great Christmas morning breakfast where all the prep has been done the night before and you have nothing to worry about, okay? Now, I'm going to add my milk. I use 1.5 teaspoons milk, so it's not a lot. It's just enough to get it a little runny, a little bit more drizzly. 1.5. There we go. And mix that together. Okay, so I set my timer early to keep an eye on it, plus I can kind of smell it. So I can see the top is getting a little brown right now. There's still about 11 minutes left though. So I am going to take a little bit of aluminum foil and cover the top. Now, what does the aluminum foil do? It is going to prevent the tops from darkening anymore so they won't burn, but it'll allow the inside to continue to cook. Okay, so it has been about 30 minutes. I'm going to pull them out of the oven, and we're going to see how well they are, if they're done. Oh, they look beautiful on top. So the trick is you want to get down there because you don't want the dough to be gummy and underdone. So I'm just using a little butter knife to kind of peel it apart and just check in between some of the layers, and it looks perfect. So while it's still warm, I am just going to drizzle on some of our icing. My family doesn't like a whole bunch of icing, so I'm not going to use a ton. You can use as much or as little as you like. And what's going to happen is because the buns are so nice and warm right now, that this icing is just going to melt into the crevices of your cinnamon rolls. And it's going to add a beautiful shine to the tops of them.